Hey, again, hello and welcome to our webinar on how to access and use data from the Child Care and Development Fund, or CCDF, Policies Database 2021. My name is Brenda Mahishi, and I am a data project manager for the Child and Family Data Archive, also known as CF Data. I am joined today by Kelly Dwyer and Margaret Todd from the Urban Institute. Kelly and Margaret will be leading the presentation today, but before I turn it over to them, I will briefly introduce you to CF Data and let you know more about the structure of this webinar. This webinar is hosted by CF Data, which is where you go to access the CCDF Policies 2021 database. CF Data is supported by a contract from the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, or OPRE, and housed at ICPSR within the University of Michigan. It is the place to discover, access, and analyze data on young children, their families and communities, and the programs that serve them. Users are able to access over 380 data sets with the ability to analyze select data sets online. You can also search and compare variables and peruse data-related publications. And of course, user support is available to assist you in finding and obtaining data. I will go into a little bit more detail about the archive later on in the webinar. For today's webinar, Kelly and Margaret will give you an overview of the CCDF Policies Database, including information on the data collection and review, the study's data files and documentation, the data file structure, and also considerations to be mindful of when using the data. They will also discuss information on state and territory COVID-19 response policies that were collected. I will then go over how to find the CCDF Policies database on the CF Data website and show you how you can access the data. And then we'll close the webinar with a brief question and answer session. I am now happy to pass the presentation over to Margaret.
Hi, so I'm Margaret. I'm a research assistant at the Urban Institute, and I'm going to provide a brief overview of the Child Care and Development Fund Policies Database. So the CCF Policies Database provides a single source of detailed policy information for the 50 states, DC, and 5 territories and outlying areas. The policies in the database are coded from the state and territory caseworker manuals used to administer the program. The database contains hundreds of detailed policy variables and tracks changes to these policies over time. The database captures the policies that have been implemented in each state and territory and the dates they went into effect. It does not track policy proposals or policies that have not yet gone into effect. Data are currently available for October 1, 2009 through October 1, 2021, with new data released annually. The database contains information across several broad policy categories. This includes information about eligibility requirements for families and children, such as age requirements for children, activity requirements for parents, and income eligibility thresholds. The database also includes information on family copayment policies, including the full range of amounts and income thresholds in which groups are exempt from copayments. The database also includes detailed information about basic application and verification requirements, requirements for redetermination and reporting changes, and priority and waiting list policies. Finally, the database includes various provider policies, including the detailed provider payment rates, policies for unlicensed home-based providers, and CCDF policies for all providers receiving subsidies. So next, a little bit on our database collection and review process. So the policies in our database are primarily coded from the state caseworker manuals and updates used to administer the program. We collect these materials on an ongoing basis so that we can capture the full policy details as well as the exact dates when the policies change. After collecting, reviewing, and coding the information in the database, this could generally take about 6 months. We then prepare a set of tables that show selected policies as of October 1 of the given year. We share the draft tables with the state and territory, CCDF administrators, and project staff and work with them to review and verify the data. This generally occurs in the spring of each year, and we ask the states to verify information from the previous fiscal year. We then finalize any data changes, draft the report, and publicly release the data in the fall following the focus date of the report. The reports and the data have been delayed for the past few years, but the usual schedule we're getting back to is to release the data and reports in the fall. And now I'm going to pass this to my colleague, Kelly Dwyer, to speak more on the data files and documentation.
Thanks so much, Margaret and Brenda. My name is Kelly Dwyer, and I'm a research associate here at the Urban Institute and the project manager of the CCDF Policies Database. Now we'll talk a little bit about different ways you can access data from the database, primarily focusing on the data files and documentation. There are three primary ways for you to access the data from the database, and three primary products that we're going to discuss. The first is our annual report or book of tables, which includes the tables that Margaret just discussed that were reviewed by states and territories and show selected policies for October 1st of each year. We also publish a set of companion briefs that show some of the policies that we include in the tables graphically. We also publish the full database detail with all the policy variables over time through our website and search tool, which is ccdf.urban.org, and you can see a screenshot of the search tool here on the right side of the screen. You're able to produce custom tables through this search tool. And finally, we publish the full data files, which also provide the full access to the full database detail and are available in multiple formats. And this is what we're going to be primarily focusing on for the remainder of this presentation. So you might be wondering what the data files are. They provide the full database detail, allowing users to access all of the information that has been coded in the database over time. Files for each policy category are available in multiple formats from the Child and Family Data Archive. Some of these formats here are listed on the screen. As you can see, they are available for a variety of statistical program packages. Additionally, users can access an Excel file on our project website that was dropped here in the chat that provides the full set of policy categories as well. Each year, we update our data files to include the newest information that was verified by the states and territories that year. And so we recommend using the most recent data files that were published on the Child and Family Data Archive and our website in your own work, since they may contain some corrections to historical data or additional information that we were able to fill in or obtain additional materials to verify during our annual review process. If you decide you want to use the full database data files in your own work, there are a couple of things that we recommend you keep in mind. You'll want to decide which variables you are interested in and how they are coded. And it's also important to understand how records are coded and why there might be multiple records for one state and a single period of time. In the rest of the webinar, we will help you answer some of the questions that you might have about how to understand these various aspects of the data files and walk you through each of these bullet points. The first step when using the data files is to review the user guide, which we also refer to as the code book on our project website. The user guide provides detailed information about the variables in the database, including variable names, definitions, coding options, and additional coding notes and instructions. The user guide also includes an introductory section that provides you with information about the full data files and database structure, followed by separate sections for each policy category and the variables that are contained in each policy category. Each individual data set has an associated code book that contains the relevant section of the code guide or user guide for that policy category. To identify variables of interest, you can review the complete sections of the relevant policy category that you're interested in, or you can use the PDF search function to review the document for key terms. For example, if you are interested in how a family unit and income are defined for eligibility, you could review the sections for the policy categories for definition of family and definition of income. Alternatively, if you are specifically interested in eligibility policies for families with teen parents, you could do a keyword search using that PDF search function of the term teen parent, and it would return the policy variables that define policies such as how teen parents are treated when defining the family unit and whether or not teen parents are given priority for subsidies when funds are limited. Once you've identified variables that you might be interested in, you will need to know what type of information is included in the user guide for that variable. The user guide provides detailed information about each variable, as you can see here on the screen, and each variable in the database, including the variable name, definition, and coding options. The user guide and codebook also include additional notes about certain policies that are handled in how certain policies are handled in coding, and information about closely related variables and how these variables might be connected to each other. As you can see here in the example on the screen, highlighting information about income disregards when determining income for eligibility. Now that we've discussed the user guide, I'm going to go into a bit more detail on the data file structure and how that relates to what you might find in the coding guide. The data files are broken into separate data files or data sets for each policy category that you will find in the user guide, and they all follow the same general format. To demonstrate the structure, we will look at selections from the Excel data tables. In each table or data set, the rows represent separate records of information, which you can see here is highlighted by a blue box. A record in the database contains the policies that apply to a particular state, time period, and group. Each column that you see here, also highlighted by blue bars at the top, represents a variable in the database. And there are three broad sets of variables in each data table or data set: the header record variables, the policy variables, and their associated notes variables that capture information on detailed state policies, and category notes variables that pick up any additional information that the database coders deemed relevant to capture for that policy category. For the policy variables notes fields, you will see that the policy variable name is repeated and followed by an underscore notes. This picks up additional details that are relevant to understanding the specific policy for that state. And in some cases, you will find that these notes fields are providing detail beyond the primary policy coded in the variable. In other cases, the notes fields are necessary to understand the coding. For example, if a variable is coded as varies, the note field will explain how the policy varies. This is the type of information that you would need to look in the user guide for to understand when and where varies might be coded for a specific policy variable. There are some variables that do not contain individual notes fields, such as dollar amounts for copayments. However, that policy category still has the overall category notes variable at the end where additional information could be captured for that state's policies. The header record variables used in the database are the same for every single category or data set in the data files. These variables provide information about who the policies in the record apply to and what dates they apply to. The header variables capture the state, county or substate area, program, family group, provider type, and provider subtype to which the policies apply. For the family group variable, this picks up cases when there might be variations for different subgroups of the population, such as different requirements for families who are receiving TANF or families who have a child with special needs. Additionally, the date header variables indicate the date that the policies first became effective and the last date that they were effective. This is one of the key benefits of using the data from the data files from the database, is because we're able to capture the really specific dates that the policies went into effect, as Margaret described earlier. You will often see the code 9999/12/31 used as the end date in the database, which you can see here in the middle of the screen. This indicates that the policies shown in the record that you are viewing are still in effect as of our last round of coding and are the most recent policy that we know of for that state. We'll come back later to the majority header variables in a minute, which you can see are the last three columns in this slide. In the data files, you will often see multiple records for states in each category. For a single state, there could be multiple records when there is a change in policy over time or when there is variation in a policy for different sub-state areas. Different types of providers, different groups of families, or different CCDF programs within the state. Because the database tracks policies over time, anytime a policy changes within a state, we code a new record for the state that captures the update to the policy. Within a policy category, if any policy in the category changes, and you can find a full list of all the policies in the user guide, an entirely new record is coded. The new record will reflect that policy change to that specific policy in one or multiple variables, and for any policies that did not change at that specific time, the coding would remain the same across records and would be carried forward from the previous record, meaning that a variable could have the same coding in a single state across multiple records that cross multiple time periods. To make this a little more concrete, we can look at an example for Texas in the copayment adjustments policy category. There are several different records or rows of information coded. All of the records here shown on the screen are for the same state. You can see that the state, family group and provider type and provider subtype remain the same across all of the rows or records of information that you can see here. But other information found in the header records, variables such as county, specific program name, and begin and end date are different. One reason for multiple records is that there is sub-state variation in policies in Texas. In this case, there are state-level policies coded and sub-state policies coded. If we look at the county variable and look up the county codes, which are also found in the full data files available through CF data, you will see that 44 represents state-level policies and 192 represents policies for the Gulf Coast region in that state. Another reason for multiple records in this policy category for this state is that there were policy updates over time. We see that a second record or set of policies was coded for the state-level policies, again for County 44, on October 1st, 2011, meaning that at least one policy in the policy category changed on that date. Many states have multiple records in each category due to policy updates or subgroup and sub-state variation. But when using data for research, you might need to select a single record or a single set of policies to represent the state's general policies. For example, if you're combining data with annual state-level administrative data, you will need to select a single set of policies for the year that can be applied to all of the records of information available through the administrative data from the state. And this is when those last three columns, the majority record variables, come into play. The majority header date variables in the database, which are highlighted here by a blue box, are called begin majority and end majority. And they help us identify the records that apply to the most populous area of the state when there is sub-state variation and no state-level policy available. For example, in the reimbursement rate category, which shows provider payment rates, Massachusetts, shown here as state code, FIPS code 25, like many states, has different rates for different regions of the state. In this case, the rates that apply to the most populous area, which is Region 6, as confirmed with our state partners, or County Code 166, will have the majority dates coded with end dates that match the regular dates fields, begin date and end date. For the areas of the state that are not the most populous, so this would be all of the other regions that we capture provider payment rates for, the majority date fields are coded with all 8s. So you can see here at the bottom, there are only 2 records that correspond with Region 16, County Code 166, and the dates for the regular dates fields and the majority dates fields match, and then the rest are coded with 8s, all 8s, which indicates that they do not cover the most populous area of the state. Additionally, the majority record header variable, which is in the last column here, can help us identify a single record or majority record for each state and territory and time period that can be used to represent the state's general policy. When this variable is coded -1, as you see here highlighted by the blue box, it identifies the record for the state and time period that applies to the most populous area of the state, families with a working parent or guardian who are not receiving TANF or transitional childcare, with children who do not have special needs, and with one child in care, who attend a licensed center-based provider and who are being reimbursed at a base level that does not include higher quality or tiered payment rates for the provider. This information is outlined in the introductory section of the user guide, which is again why it's really helpful when using the data files to have that user guide handy so you can reference all of the information in it. You can use the majority record variable to help you identify a single record for a state and time period for your own work, or you may choose to select records based on your own selection criteria. For example, if you are interested in policies for families who are receiving TANF, you may not want, and there are policies that differ based on TANF receipt in the state or territory that you're interested in, you may not want to select the majority record. I'm now going to discuss a few considerations that for you to keep in mind when using the data from the CCDF Policies Database in your own work. There are a few important things to keep in mind whenever you are using the data from the full data files available through CF data in your own work. The data cover policy changes over time, including changes that occur within a single year. So although one of our annual products focuses on policies that were in effect at one point in time, which is October 1st, the full data files capture all the policy changes that occurred throughout that fiscal year, which could include multiple changes whenever a policy update is issued by the state. As previously noted, if you are matching the data from the database with other data sources, such as administrative data, you will want to select a single date for the policy data, which again might be different than the book of tables that we annually publish. Additionally, you will want to think about the unit of analysis. For example, if you are planning on using the data for state level analysis paired with other state level data, you will need to determine how to select a single set of policies for the state, using those considerations I mentioned earlier when discussing variations for different subgroups and family types and substate areas. If your analysis is for counties in a state, you can incorporate any county variations in policy, such as for the provider payment rates, like we just discussed. And you will also need to decide how to handle policies for different subgroups of families and whether or not you want to include those families and policies in your own analysis. It's also important to keep in mind how we have defined terms in the database as outlined in the user guide. We have decided to use standardized terminology to allow us to consistently capture policies across all states and territories, which means that the terminology may differ from the terminology used in specific states and territories. Another consideration is how the variables can be used. In many cases, the variables can be used as coded. However, in other cases, they may need to be combined with other variables, such as the copayment amounts variables that need to be combined with variables that explain how the state or territory calculates copayments, as well as the copayment income thresholds variables. There are also cases in the database where coding is other or varies, as we mentioned earlier, and the associated notes field, which is represented by _notes, provides the additional detailed policy information that explains that policy coding. In these cases, you'll have to review the notes coding in addition to the coding for the general policy variable in order to understand what the policy for that state or territory means. While as you're doing this, you may need to also consult the coding guide or user guide again, which can explain why different coding decisions were made in these specific cases. Finally, there are cases throughout the database where the policy information was not available from the state policy documents when that policy was initially coded, and the variable is coded as missing data or not in manual. You may decide to drop these cases or default to a certain coding option when the data is missing. And again, the user guide can be really helpful in explaining why some variables may be coded in this way. Now that we've discussed the data files generally, we want to talk a little bit more about something unique in the 2021 data files available from CF Data and from our project website, which is information on state and territory policies in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2020 and 2021, our team worked with our partners at state and territory CCDF agencies to verify information about policy changes made in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The data was coded from caseworker manuals and policy updates in keeping with our regular coding and research process. The information was not collected from surveys. And the information, again, was verified by states and territories in addition to the information that we regularly collect. So all of the information in the 2021 data files covers the normal course of the policy information that we capture in addition to this COVID-19 related information. Because policies enacted in response to the COVID-19 pandemic were often temporary or passed through emergency rules, we were also able to collect information and code information based on data provided to us by our state contacts during verification and waiver requests approved by the Administration for Children and Families. COVID-19 response policies can be found in our underlying database and data files within coding in existing variables, as well as those variable notes and category notes. This is an example of a time it would be really helpful for anyone using the data files to review the variable notes and category notes, because a lot of policy changes that were made in response to the pandemic, we were able to capture that information in the notes fields. For example, if you are looking for policies related to copayment waivers in response to the pandemic, this information, along with beginning and ending dates, is captured in the category notes fields for the copayment amount policy categories in the data files in underlying database. The COVID-19 response policies we were able to verify with states through our annual review process includes policies for families and providers. The policies for families include redetermination and job search time periods, requirements for verification and reporting changes, policies for essential workers and copayment waivers. Policies for providers include health and safety requirements, provider payment policies, and provider payment rates. We were able to capture additional policies in our underlying database, but because these policies weren't generally a part of our annual table review process, they may not be verified by the states and territories. These policies listed on the screen are also available through our annual COVID-19 appendices, which we published for 2020 and 2021. That are appendices to the annual book of tables and can be found on our project website. While our published products like the book of tables focused on one date, these policy briefs, along with the complete database detail, focus on the entire year, again, which allows you to look at the specific dates that these policies may have changed in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Next, we wanted to provide you with a few different examples of ways that we were able to use the COVID-19 related policy changes that we captured in the underlying database in our research, and maybe inspire you all to use the COVID-19 related policy information from the database in your own work. This is one example of how researchers might be able to use the information in the database to see how state and territories change their CCDF policies in response to the pandemic. We can see here that 23 states and territories expanded their job search policies due to the pandemic during 2020, while 31 states and territories did not. For states that expanded their policies, many increased the amount of time they allowed for job search, while others began newly allowing job search for initial eligibility, rather than only allowing families who are already receiving childcare subsidies to participate in job search activities. Here we have another example of how you might be able to use the information related to COVID-19 from the database in your own work. We wanted to look at how copayments for different family sizes and incomes changed during the course of the pandemic, because we learned through our annual verification process and our annual policy collection process that a lot of states and territories waived co-payments for different groups of families or all families during the pandemic. Here we can see that prior to the pandemic, which we are defining as January 30th, 2020, which was prior to the emergency declaration, that only 4 states and territories did not require families to pay a co-payment for a family of 3 earning $30,000 annually. In contrast, we can see that between January 31st, 2020 and March 1st, 2022, which is the most recent date that we collected COVID-19 policy information for, that 47 states and territories waived co-payments for some families or for all families during this time period. We were able to obtain this information by, again, looking in the category notes field of our data set that captures the co-payment amounts for families participating in the CCDF program to determine which states had waived co-payments at any point during this 1.5-year long stretch. I want to leave you with a little bit of additional information about the CCDF Policies Database before handing it back to Brenda. If you have any questions about the database, the online search tool, the detailed data available through the search tool, or the data files, you can feel free to contact us through the contact form on our project website. Again, I believe the project website was left in the chat, and we also have a project email address also left in the chat if you wanted to reach out to our team. We would like to thank our federal funder, the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, as well as our partners there, Kathleen Dwyer and Sarah Blankenship, who I believe may also be on the call. I'd also like to thank our project director, Sarah Minton, who I believe is also on the call, as well as our senior advisor, Linda Gianarelli and Margaret, for helping during our presentation today, as well as Danielle Kwan, who was part of the research team during the 2021 data collection process. Now I can pass it back to Brenda to wrap up the presentation.
Thank you, Kelly. Now I'm just going to briefly give an overview of the Child and Family Data Archive. So launched in 2019, CF Data preserves and disseminates data on early care, education, and families and programs that serve them. The CCDF Policies Database is just one of the hundreds of data sets archived at CF Data for secondary data analysis, along with their accompanying documentation. All of these data are available to researchers to analyze free of charge. CF Data has a range of data, including on federal and state-funded programs such as Head Start, the Child Care and Development Fund Block Grant, and the Maternal, Infant, and Early Childhood Home Visiting Program. We also have administrative data, community-based surveys focused on parent and child development, and observational studies in classrooms and homes. The CF Data website is available at childandfamilydataarchive.org. Through the website, users can explore data, learn more about childcare and early education research, and discover the training opportunities presented by us. The first tab on the website, circled here in red, is called Getting Started, and it provides a great overview for new users of some of the highlights to the website, with quick links to various resources that might be helpful to you. Under the Data tab, users can search and browse the entire CF Data catalog, including by using filters such as release date to find recently released or updated data, or by subject terms if you're not quite sure where to start or what you're looking for. There's also a helpful how to access data page that can help you learn more about the access methods and application process for restricted data. Other data-related tabs include the Variables tab and the Publications tabs. So the Variables tab allows users to search for variables across all studies housed at CF Data, and the Publication tab searches through any publications that have cited data that is archived at CF Data, and then we provide a link back to the cited study. Under the About Us tab, users can learn more about CF Data, our project team, and about announcements, data releases, and upcoming trainings through the news link. We also have a collection of video resources on our website under the Resources tab. Here you will find many videos of past data release webinars and their accompanying slides. You can also filter the videos by a particular data set here. A video recording of today's webinar will be added to this page when it is available. So this was just a brief overview of CF Data, but to learn more about the archive, we encourage you to visit us at our website and click on the About Us page, where you'll find a fun, short 2-minute video that introduces you to the collection and the resources that we provide. So now let's turn to how you can access the CCDF Policies Database through the CF Data website. To find the study, enter the study title or acronym in the search box highlighted here, and then you hit return or click on the magnifying glass, and that will take you to the search results page. So here we have an example using CCDF policies as the search term. So as you can see, CF Data has several years of the CCDF Policies Database archived with us. So it's important to make sure that you check the dates at the end of the title to make sure that you are getting the database that you were looking for. Alternatively, you can enter CCDF Policies 2021 as the search term, and then the 2021 database will be the first result that appears. So then when you click on the study title, it will take you to the study homepage. So this is a screenshot of the study homepage for the 2021 database. The homepage is where you will access the data and where you can also find important information about the study. So in the At a Glance tab here, you can find a summary about the data and information on the design, sampling, data collection period, and more. There are multiple ways to learn more about the data on the study homepage prior to downloading the data. First, if you click on the Explore Data button, you can access a data preview, which provides a quick glimpse into the study's data. So a limited number of variables and cases will appear by default, but then you can choose other variables to show. And then you can see what the data look like. You can also choose to view frequencies and crosstabs for select variables within this Explore Data tool. Next, the Variables tab highlighted here allows you to search and compare variables within this database. So you would simply enter words that relate to your measures of interest in the search box here, and then the search results will return related variables and give you the variable name, the label or question text, and then show you where that variable can be found in which data set. Lastly, on the data and documentation tab, you can download the documentation by file level when you click on the drop down next to each file listed here. And then you can also preview the user's guide or code book before downloading the documentation to your computer. The data for this study are publicly available and do not require an application to access. Simply create or log into your ICPSR My Data account, or Researcher Passport as it will be called in the next coming months, and download the files of interest directly to your computer instantly. You can download individual files using these drop downs listed next to each data file, or you can download all of the files using this download button at the top. If you experience issues accessing the data, archive staff are available to assist you. You can just email us at cfdata-help@umich.edu with your questions. And if you happen to have questions about the CCDF Policies Database itself, you can email ccdfdatabase@urban.org or complete the Contact Us form on the Urban Institute website. And now we are happy to take a few questions. If you'd like to ask a question out loud, you can raise your hand with the Zoom emoji and we can unmute your mic. I see that we have some questions coming in already, so we can get started. So it says, how did you determine which policies to track in response to the pandemic?
That's a really good question. So when we determined which policies we wanted to track in response to the pandemic, which you saw on an earlier slide, that there were a handful of policies for families and a handful of policies for providers, we looked at the information that we already collected in the database, like eligibility criteria for families, including job search policies, eligibility thresholds for families, and co-payment amounts. And we looked at the information that we were seeing coming out from states and territories in their policy documents during 2020. And that's how we decided which policies we wanted to make sure that we captured policy changes in response to the pandemic for. So in those three specific ones I just mentioned, we were seeing a lot of states and territories extending the amount of time that families could be eligible for a job search, as well as allowing families to participate in job search at initial application, as I mentioned earlier when I showed that map. We were also seeing, again, a lot of states and territories were issuing co-payment waivers for all families or some families, or we're putting out different eligibility thresholds for families who had an essential worker in them that were higher normally than eligibility thresholds for other families during the pandemic. Then we worked with our partners at OPRE and OCC to develop a supplemental set of tables, which again can be found in our COVID-19 appendix briefs that are published on our project website, so that we really made sure that the information that we thought would be most relevant to researchers and policymakers about CCDF policies in response to the pandemic were specifically verified by our state and territory partners at the state and territory agencies. So that was the process that we went through during 2020, 2021, and also during 2022, when we were trying to verify information about changes made to CCDF state policies in response to the pandemic.
Great. So another question we had is, when I am using the data files, what is the best way to determine which policies were changed in response to the pandemic versus policies that were changed in the regular process of states updating their policies?
That's another good question. As we mentioned earlier in the presentation, we capture a new record for a state anytime a policy is updated for a given policy category. So during 2020 and 2021 and 2022, many states and territories had updates to policies that were completely unrelated to the pandemic, that were things that they normally update, such as eligibility thresholds, or perhaps they changed their waiting list policies, or they changed the policy for whether or not high school students were required to work. Those may have been policy changes that occurred in their normal process of updating policies each year. And so if you are interested in specifically looking for policies that were changed in response to the pandemic, that's when I think it'll be really helpful, again, to use those variable notes fields, which are designated by the variable name _ notes, because anytime that we knew a policy was directly changed in response to the pandemic, such as, again, extending the amount of time that families were eligible for job search, we included that information in the notes field, as well as in category notes fields for policy categories that did not have individual policy variable notes fields, such as the copayment amount and thresholds categories, as well as the provider payment rate categories and eligibility thresholds policy categories. So the easiest way is just to look in those notes fields.
Did you change the variable coding options or add new variables to account for these pandemic-related changes?
We did not change our variable coding options or add new variables to account for pandemic-related changes. This was because we want to make sure that the information available in the database is consistent across time, so that if someone is interested in conducting a longitudinal analysis, which is one of the key benefits of using the database, that they're able to consistently access the same variables with the same variable coding options across many different years. And that's why we decided to pick up a lot of those coding changes in the associated notes fields instead of adding new coding options, is to make it easy to use the data files going forward.
We have one more COVID-related question. Will the next data release also track COVID-related policy changes?
That's a good question. As we noted, that this data release includes information from the database through October 1st, 2021. We will soon be releasing our 2022 reports and data files as well. And we will continue capturing policy information as it is verified and provided to us by states and territories. So if changes were made in response to the pandemic and either made permanent or carried forward, we would continue to capture that information in the database. And in the data files, however, we are no longer publishing the COVID-19 appendices to the book of tables beginning in 2022 with the 2022 data release. So those two briefs are exclusive to the 2020 and 2021 data releases.
Okay. We have another question in the chat. What does the administrative data cover? Are you familiar with the?
I don't know if that was a question necessarily for our team or if that was more a question for the CF data team. So I will defer to you on that, if that's okay.
Okay. Yes, the CF data does house the CCDF administrative data as well. So that is, I would encourage you to visit the CF data website and take a look at the study homepage for CCDF admin to get a good idea of what is being collected there. To find that particular study on our website, you could just search using, make sure you use the word administrative in the search term so that you can differentiate between the policies database and the administrative data. And then some of the data files there are also public that you can download, and you can also download the documentation to get a better idea of what is available there. And I see I think my colleagues are will put some information into the chat about where to find that. And then lastly, we have one question that says, can you tell me what's the difference between the data on the project website versus what's available from CF data?
So the data files available through CF data are available through a variety of different formats, which we listed earlier on one of the slides. And off the top of my head, I know they're available in Stata and SAS, R, and for a variety of different statistical program packages, which means that for any of the research programs that your team might use, there is a download available for you to be able to easily use the data. And then the data available in the data files on our website is in an Excel format. In addition to the data files on our website, we also have our search tool and our project reports, but all of the information available through CF data and through our project website will be exactly the same. So you don't have to worry about having to look two different places to get different types of information. It's just about your preference for how you want to obtain it.
Okay, great. I think we have covered all the questions that have come in, but I just want to remind everybody that if you have additional questions that you think of, please feel free to either email the Urban Institute team at CCDF Database at urban.org, or you can email CF Data at cfdata-help@umich.edu. I also want to remind you to please visit the CF Data website to access these data. And while you're there, you can also sign up for our listserv to receive notifications on data release announcements, data webinars, and workshops, as well as our quarterly newsletter. We will be sending out a notification to everyone who registered for today's webinar when the recording is uploaded and available on our website. So again, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today, and I want to thank Kelly and Margaret for sharing all of this really great information. Thank you, everyone.